Okay, I haven't been able to make a video for my Magic the Gathering channel for a while now, and I think it's about time that I actually do that. I think it's time I talk about something that's been bothering me about this game that I adore for years. I'm going to be honest, I do not think the Mythic slot in Magic the Gathering should exist. I do not think it should exist at all in any way, shape, or form. Now, for those of you who might not play Magic and might not know what the Mythic slot is, basically, in Magic the Gathering, there are 4 types of rarities. You have commons, uncommons, rares, and mythic rares in ascending order. Every draft booster pack contains 11 commons, it contains 3 uncommons, and then it contains 1 rare or mythic rare slot. And for every 8 rares in a booster box, there is 1 mythic rare that you can potentially find. So usually between 3 or 4 mythic rares in every booster box. Now, I'm going to be honest, I hate this system. I really do. And I think part of that comes from the fact that I grew up in a world where the mythic rare didn't exist. You see, mythic rares were introduced, if memory serves, in the Shards of Alara block. And before then, we only had the 3 rarities. We had commons, we had uncommons, and we had rares. In theory, every rare has an equal chance of appearing in a pack, but yeah, we'll get on why that's a bit of a lie later. In theory, every rare has a chance of appearing in a pack, supposedly equal to every other rare in the set. By adding an extra super ultra awesome rarity on top of that, I'm gonna be honest, I feel like you just increase the likelihood that cards will be too expensive for players to play. Now, I also grew up in a world where doubling season was $5, so maybe I just lived in a different world than what I'm used to now, what I've grown accustomed to now. But you have to ask yourself, when you're looking at your Magic the Gathering cards, when you're buying your booster boxes, when you're buying your stuff, should cards in Magic packs be ridiculously expensive? And I'm gonna go ahead and say, I don't think this game should be that expensive. I don't think it's right for this game to be that expensive. Now, some of the MTG finance bros might come at me and go like, you're just mad you can't afford this game. No, I can. I literally write off my cards on taxes because I use them on stream, and streaming is my job full-time. I don't want to hear any shit from anybody that's like, you can't spend money on the game, so you're angry. I play competitively in Modern and in Pioneer. I know what a price tag looks like. So, let's get that part out of the way real quick first. But my reasoning comes down mainly to necessity and accessibility. Let me go ahead and give this to you through the lens of another company that most trading card game players would be familiar with. Konami. Now, for the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game, for the longest time, we've had a dual system where Konami has the OCG in Japan and the TCG in North America. Now, OCG cards are not allowed to be played in the TCG, and there's never been a really good reason why, except for Konami to make more money. Now, the way they do this is when cards perform really well in Japan, when they come to America, they get upshifted in rarity. For example, Dark Armed Dragon, which defined an entire format over a decade ago, was a regular rare. And for those who don't know, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Rarities go common, rare, super rare, ultra rare, secret rare, and then a whole bunch of other nonsense that doesn't really matter anymore. It parallels what we have in Magic the Gathering pretty well up to a point. But because of that system, that meant that you would almost always have a rare in a pack, sometimes have a super rare, on occasion have an ultra rare, and only twice per booster box would you have a secret rare. This meant that if you bought a box of Yu-Gi-Oh cards, you might end up with 1 or 2 Dark Arm Dragons if you were in Japan, and because you had 1 or 2 Dark Arm Dragons, you had about as much as you needed to start building a deck around the card. But in Magic the Gathering, that's not the case. And in America, that's not the case. In America, Dark Arm Dragon got upshifted to a secret rare. So now instead of being able to find 2 per box on average, you would find 2 per case on average. And a case contains 6 booster boxes. And you would have to be very lucky to even get the 2 in the case. Now, why does this have anything to do with Magic the Gathering? Well, because if you look at any competitive deck for Magic, and I'm talking about formats like Standard, Pioneer, Modern, most decks must contain playsets of cards. They must contain between 3 and 4 of any one card. And I'm going to be honest, I feel like half the reason people don't play these formats that much anymore, Standard, Modern, Pioneer, they're too expensive. I can build a Commander deck for $50. I can walk into a card shop, sit down to a group of people, have a quick Rule Zero discussion. Rule Zero is BS, by the way. I'll do a separate video on that. But have a quick Rule Zero discussion over what power level we're trying to play, sit down with my $50 Commander deck, and have a grand old time. But if I try doing the same thing in Pioneer or in Modern, that simply won't work. Modern is too damn expensive. Fetch lands are way too expensive. The One Ring has entered the format, and that's a $40 to $50 card, and that's necessary for decks like Tron to even function these days. And oh, by the way, Modern Horizons 3 is coming out, so I hope you're all ready to replace all of your decks you've been playing with the artificial rotation that gets pumped into the game, because we thought Magic had something better than Yu-Gi-Oh!, but no, Wizards of the Coast is just taking all of their cues from Konami so that they can print more money. Yay, I guess. What does this have to do with the Mythic Rare slot? Well, let's talk about how most people, and how Wizards of the Coast has to be able to make money on Magic. If Magic the Gathering, as a card game, does not sell booster packs, then booster packs themselves have to become more expensive per unit for Wizards of the Coast to make a return on any investment in the packs. And it's not just the printing of the packs they have to make money off of. They have licensing fees, they have research and development on the actual cards. There's a lot of people at Wizards that get paid for the stuff they do. So most players have learned that it's simpler, it's better, it's way more cost effective, by the way, to buy single cards to build any deck, whether it be Commander or Modern or what have you. But I want to focus on Modern real quick. The average cost of a Modern deck is $1,200. $1,200. Now, for those of you who are enfranchised in Modern, as I am, I have Affinity, I have Hardened Scales, I have Bogles. For those of us who are enfranchised in Modern, we're desensitized to this. We're used to this. We're used to spending a fuck ton of money on a fetch land. We're used to spending a ton of money on trying to get particular format staples that simply cannot be replaced. Yes, there is no functional replacement for Ragavan. Do not kid yourself into thinking there is one. Now, what happens when this game is so expensive? Well, the people who are enfranchised in Modern might say, oh, well, I spent this much money on my deck, and I've already done it. I shouldn't have to feel one way or the other whenever cards become reprinted and become more cheaply. But no, that's a stupid way to look at things. Cards becoming reprinted is a good thing, and most importantly, I think cards should not only be reprinted, cards should be downshifted. Now, I hate to keep on bringing up Yu-Gi-Oh!, but there's actually one good thing Konami does for the Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game, and it is the frequent downshifting of legacy cards. Take a card like Pot of Duality, a card in Yu-Gi-Oh! That says, look at the top 3 cards of your deck, put one in your hand, and throw the other 2 away. Really strong card, and it's a really common effect in Magic the Gathering to find cards that do something similar to that. Cards like Ponder come to mind. Now, Pot of Duality, when it came out, was about $110, and this was over a decade ago, so those dollars stretched way further back then. That was $110 of 2010 money. That's a lot. But then something interesting happened. Something that Konami's been doing for years. They have a system called the Mega Tins, or back then they just had the tins. And each tin, back then, had between 1 and 5 guaranteed cards that would be reprints of cards that were commonly used in the previous formats. And in the tins of the following year after Pot of Duality's release, Pot of Duality received a reprint, making it super rare and taking it from a $100 card to a $10 card. And then, the next year, Pot of Duality, which still saw play in a great plethora of decks, got printed in a starter deck, taking it from a $10 card to a $1 card. Why does this matter? Well, sometimes Wizards of the Coast downshifts cards like Gutter Snipe so that they can enter formats like Pauper. Other times, they just don't downshift the cards. Actually, most of the time, Wizards of the Coast upshifts cards. Think of cards like Demonic Tutor that were rare when they came out, or even cards that began their lives as uncommons in older sets, and then, as they got reprinted, became rares and later became mythics. It's a very common thing to happen in Magic the Gathering, and the only real reason this happens is so Wizards can sell more packs. Now, here's the thing. Konami has never had any shortage of people buying Yu-Gi-Oh! Packs. People buy those things in droves, so we know that the strategy of downshifting these cards won't make people buy less packs. So what do we do? Well, we come back to the problem of the Mythic Rare slot. Why do some cards that were rare need to be printed at Mythic Rare later? Well, to make them less likely to show up in packs, so that people will chase those packs more often, trying to get more copies of those cards. I don't think this is a good system, because this system makes Magic the Gathering act more like a collectible and less like a game. Now, what do I mean by that? Because those of you who've been playing Magic for years might go, but I do collect my collection. That's why it's called a collection. Soy boy on the internet talking to a cat girl avatar in front of a color-shifted Pokemon Snap background. Like, yeah, I get it. I get it. You have a card collection, and a lot of you want your card collection to maintain its value. But this all comes at a cost. I have a theory that the reason Commander became the most played format in Magic wasn't just because after COVID everybody wanted something they could sit down at a table for and play with their friends. It's not just because Wizards of the Coast has been focusing more on that format than anything. I think it's because nobody can fucking afford to play this game. The average Pioneer deck is $500, and that's a format that doesn't even have fetch lands. Add fetch lands into the mix, and suddenly your average deck becomes $1,000. Yeah, you can play budget decks. Those don't win tournaments. Yeah, you can be the person that does, oh, but you can play Pokemon, and it has a $30 competitive deck, and you could just play the game. No, we're not doing that. If we like a card game, we want that card game to improve. Leaving the card game that we've invested hundreds of hours, thousands of dollars, and a ton of time and friendships into, I'm sorry, that's not the way to go. That's not the way to do this. Each card game has its own fan base, and each card game has its own method of doing things. I think it's perfectly okay to want your card game to improve, rather than telling everybody to jump ship and go to Flesh and Blood, or Lorcana, or Pokemon, or whatever flavor of the month this is the thing that's going to kill Magic the Gathering comes out in the next 10 years. I think it's okay for us to want this game to get better. And part of that is, well, de-commanderifying Magic. Now, I'm not saying Commander's bad. I love Commander. I think everybody having a Commander deck is great. But here's the thing. Everybody had Commander decks when Commander wasn't the focus of Magic the Gathering. And in fact, they also didn't have CEDH. I'm going to make a separate video about my problems with CEDH as a concept, but it used to be that Commander was a format that people played when they were done with their tournaments. Now, the tournaments that are played are Commander tournaments. And that leads to Commander decks needing to be competitive, and then they end up costing the same as other decks, but then those other formats don't get played, and it creates a cycle. People who get bought into competitive Commander don't want to play the other competitive formats in Magic, and then suddenly the other competitive formats end up dying. Again, how do you fix this? Well, one way would be to remove that Mythic Rare slot. Make this game more accessible to people. The average price of a deck in Magic the Gathering should not be $500 to $1,000. Don't even get me started on Legacy, a format that only exists with proxies involved. If every other format is too expensive to play, then every other format will die. And every diehard that tries to say that, well, then the casuals won't be part of those formats and that's better. No. Without casual players, your game dies. Everything about your game dies. You will be left only with Commander. I think Commander is an amazing flavor. It's amazing spice. It is an amazing addition to the world of Magic the Gathering. But I don't think it should be the only world that Magic the Gathering has. And a lot of the problem with how Magic the Gathering operates right now is how damn expensive this game is. If you want to make Modern less expensive for people, then the way you do that is you get rid of the Mythic slot, and you make sure that Modern staples that have been there for years are printed into the ground so people have access to them. Now, there's an opinion I hold from somebody who used to play Weiss, and it's an opinion that's also held by another larger YouTuber than me, Pleasant Kenobi, and that's that you should be able to print everything in Commander, in Modern, in Legacy, in every format. You should be able to print all of it into the ground, but you should have special rarities available to the people who want to collect. As an example, a super rare revised list Birds of Paradise is still about $400, but I can buy a Birds of Paradise right now for $5. When I was a kid, it was $10, so that card's actually, availability has made that card much cheaper now than it used to be, because $5 in today dollars is, you know, like $2 in when I was a kid dollars. This is a good thing. Making sure that people who are playing Modern decks where they can't just use a functional substitute, you can't just functionally substitute a Birds of Paradise in decks that specifically need Birds of Paradise. Making it so that people can play those decks well is a good thing. And my dog is barking in the background because, of course, she is. That is great. Said I anything green? Well, just in general, the biggest problem Magic the Gathering has over everything else right now is accessibility. If this game continues to be inaccessible in every format except Commander, then eventually every format that's not Commander will just be dead. I live in the Atlanta region. I live in one of the most competitively dense card game areas in the United States. New York and Texas are two of the other ones, but there's a thriving gaming community here. And you know what's one of the hardest things for me to do? Find Pioneer tournaments. That's incredibly difficult, and it's even hard to find Modern tournaments. Yes, I know, there are a couple of card shops here that routinely have Pioneer and routinely have Modern, but it shouldn't be just a couple card shops in a giant area. Every card shop should have enough of a player base to support these formats. Otherwise, even the card shops start to suffer, because then on days where Pioneer or Modern are happening, instead of going to my favorite card shops, we have to go to whatever card shop is guaranteed to have the player base for those formats. And now we run into the problem of people not being able to afford to drive to some of those card shops. For me, if I want to get a Pioneer tournament in, I have to drive an hour and a half west of me. Or east of me, actually. East of me. I have to drive an hour and a half east. I shouldn't have to drive an hour and a half east when there is a card shop within 10 minutes of me, 15 minutes of me, and 20 minutes of me, respectively. I should be able to play my favorite formats at whatever card shop is there, but the problem is the player base for every format that's not Commander is spread so thin now. that they can't be in multiple card shops. They end up only in 1 or 2 in a given area, and that's if you can make it to those areas. Because this game is too expensive now. It is seriously too expensive now. I think that's the biggest issue. When I was growing up, some of the standard decks that you could play would run you maybe 90 or 80 bucks. And I know that's about 180 or so in today dollars, but that's still a much more reasonable price. That's still a much more reasonable price than what we have now. Yumi in the chat says, so the question, if cards need to be reprinted to make it more accessible for more people to play, how would you do that without cluttering out booster boxes as is? Because there's already way too many cards in one set to begin with. Simple. Let's go ahead and use a tried and true strategy that Wizards of the Coast used to use for years. Let's use one of the strategies they have employed for decades and abandoned. Core sets. Simple answer. Core sets. Bring core sets back. For those who don't know, the core set used to be the reprint set of Magic the Gathering. Every single standard rotation had a core set, and that core set brought with it reprints upon reprints upon reprints, and they only had reprints. Newer core sets have new cards in them. I don't think they should. I think core sets should only have reprints. But I think it goes further than that. When I was growing up, we had Type 1 and Type 2. Everything that we played in the regular standard tournaments, that was Type 2. Everything that rotated out became Type 1. I think, because we have multiple formats now, Jesus Christ. Of course she is barking at this exact time. But wasn't the problem with core sets being that it was a trap for new players with how they were advertised? How was a core set a trap for a new player? In what way? The entire point of a core set was to have a base type of card that, while sometimes less powerful than everything else in the format, still gave you the base tools you needed for every other set. It gave other sets design space for whatever lands they wanted to put in, because there could be a core set that brought in rotation. I don't see how core sets are a trap for new players. Unless you're talking about Planeswalker decks from core sets, those were a trap for new players. Those were terrible products that nobody should have ever bought. But I don't see how the set itself was a trap for anybody. Its design, or the original design of core sets, was a set of cards that were brought in for the sole purpose of being reprinted cards. I said, Guff is alive. I said, not only that, they should also make specific types of packs, such as all spells, all monsters, etc., for people who want extras of those specific types of cards. I disagree with that one, Stoff. I 100% disagree with that one. Because Wizards of the Coast already has another issue going on right now, and that is there being too much confusing product in the game right now. March of the Machine came out with like 10 different types of product for it for no reason. I think it's okay for booster packs to contain a mix of spells and creatures and all that other stuff, because then we start getting into how far down in categories do we need to make cards go? How far down do we have an aristocrat pack? Do we have a dragons pack? Do we have an elf pack? No, Davinia, not core sets. Not... Oh my god. Despite the fact that everybody should be able to understand the words coming out of my mouth. Core sets. Core sets. These core sets. You fuckers. Also, just a small note, the heyday of core sets also didn't have the mythic slot. You know, just throwing that out there. Just kind of important. Just kind of a side thing. Anyways. To make this game more accessible to more people, to make this game more available to more people, you need cards to be reprinted, and you need rarities to not be as, well, rare as they are. Good cards should not be hard to come by. Yumi says in the chat, when I was in Florida, a lot of people would go for core sets, and then when they tried to build a deck or tried to figure out what they wanted to do, was never up to snuff, because then people would get turned off to the game because they needed to get something like main sets too, and made things complicated. Yumi, nothing about that has changed. Nothing about that has changed in the main game. It is impossible in the current game of Magic the Gathering, and it has always been impossible in the game of Magic the Gathering, to make a competitive deck focusing only on one set in the game. Whether that be a core set, or whether that be a set as part of a block, or whether that be Kamigawa or what have you, whatever new set is out, you cannot build a deck off of a single set. That is just a card game thing. That is entirely on that. Tell that to my tribal elves from Kaldheim. I will tell that to your tribal elves from Kaldheim, Yumi. I will 100% do that. If that deck, in its standards rotation, only contained cards from Kaldheim, only Kaldheim cards, nothing else, I guarantee you it would be mopped up by every other competitive player in that format. Because that's how Magic has worked for years. Said challenge accepted. Go ahead. Farewell, go Burr. Like, there are multiple sets in Magic. You don't build a standard or a modern or a legacy or in any format deck off of only a single set and expect it to work well. That's just a problem that new players are going to have to get over. I'm sorry. That is just how card games work. That's how card games have practically always worked. That's entirely them. So my dog is just let off. Okay, I'm not reading Divinia's things anymore. So you got Lord of the Rings commander decks today? Anyway. The point of all this is that I want this game to be accessible to more people. I think the best way to do that is making it to where rarity is not as much of a hindrance for players who want to play this game. And I think it's also good for people not to think that certain things are traps, even though they aren't actually traps. Yumi. I don't think individual cards should be as expensive as they are, and I think that instead of reprinting cards and then making them super expensive in those sets, I think that cards should get infinitely less expensive and less rare as they get reprinted, with there being special artwork treatments or whatever, in order to facilitate there being collector's value still for this game. Yeah, it says, I love Sarah's train. Trains with thoughts are the best. You're only those trains are super fun. Yeah! But I'm going to start muting chat entirely if I'm doing a recording and you try to derail me in a recording. I will start actually muting all of you sorry motherfuckers. I have no chill. Jesus. Jesus. But anyway, that's my rant. I want this game to be playable by everybody who enjoys it. I don't want people to be priced out of this game. And I think pricing people out of a card game is a stupid thing. I don't think that should happen. At all. I said don't make it a whale-only game. No, don't. This should not be a whale-only game. And as of right now, if you want to play Modern, only whales can play Modern, period. Only whales can play Modern. Only people who spend over $1,000, for the most part, can play Modern. And if you want to go into the comment section and tell me about your really, really, like, amazing $30 deck that you've definitely cleared house with in Modern, go ahead. Go off on it. I'm glad that you're special, and I'm glad that the world around you has worked in such a way that you get to be the anime protagonist. And nothing wrong has happened in your life ever, and I'm glad everybody clapped when you won the last tournament. As for the rest of us, let's try to see what we can do about making this game more accessible for everybody else. Yeah? Yeah? Okay. I guess I'll add this as an addendum to the video because I forgot, but for those of you who enjoy Modern and Pioneer and those other formats that are not Commander, understand this. Your formats will die. They will simply die. Your formats will be popular for a handful of months, and then people will stop playing them, and then they will die. They will be popular when Wizards of the Coast makes an announcement. They'll be popular when a new set comes out specifically for those formats. But make no mistake, if this game continues to be as expensive as it is, those formats will die. Because even the most die-hard player for Modern is not going to be able to justify spending $1,200 on a deck when there's nobody to play it with. When there's nobody to play their game with anymore. That's it. It's dead. There's nothing to be done anymore. So if you disagree with me and this game's expenses, perfectly fine. Please check yourself. If you want this game to continue to live in something that is not just Commander the Gathering, then you want cards to become less expensive. You want cards to be accessible. You want people to have access to game pieces. Period. Anyways, insert end of video tagline here.